As someone who was raised in a small storefront church on the south side of Chicago, may my grandfather, the Reverend James E. Eccles, who's now an ancestor, rest in peace and power. Whenever I felt burdened, my grandfather would sing a song we very often sang in church: "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Joy has not come. Joy has not come because my heart is heavy with grief. It grieves for the 1,200 Israeli civilians who were heinously murdered by Hamas on October 7th. It grieves for the 240 hostages still held by Hamas and their families. And it grieves for the over 11,000 Palestinian civilians killed by the Israeli military in the week since, nearly half of whom are children. Joy has not come in the morning because the loss of life we have seen in a mere 5 weeks is overwhelming, devastating, incomprehensible. Entire generations of Palestinian families erased entirely. Again, vengeance is not a foreign policy doctrine.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
Hospitals bombed, electricity shut off, food, fuel, and medicine dwindling, clean drinking water essentially non-existent. I stood at this podium 3 weeks ago to mourn the 1,100 Palestinian children killed by Israeli bombs. Today, that number is nearly 5 times higher. Children. I am haunted by the words and the images of the Palestinian children in Gaza who convened their own press conference in English so that you would not misunderstand their desperate appeals to live. They said, "We want to live. We want peace." It has been children in this society, and what a damning commentary that our children are always having to make appeals for their lives, from March for Our Lives, to the children of Tigray, to the children of Soweto, to the children of Gaza, pleading for mercy and to live. There is no justification for the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, from their elders to their babies. As people of faith, we believe that we are all God's children, Palestinian, Israeli, Americans alike. Regardless of our religion or nation of birth, we are one human family, and we have a moral obligation to be our brothers and our sisters' keeper, a collective righteous mandate to save lives. And the mandate is clear. Ceasefire now. We are not alone, and we are not afraid. Millions across the globe have echoed our calls for an end to the bloodshed, from the United Nations and the Pope to the President of France and healthcare workers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which I represent. This is a movement that is pro-peace, pro-faith, and pro-humanity. And this movement is growing every day. Last month, I sat with the families of hostages who spoke of deep love and grief, and they made it clear that they didn't want vengeance. They just want their loved ones safely home. Ceasefire now. Every action taken by policymakers in this moment should be in pursuit of peace, not an escalation of violence and bloodshed. The United States cannot allow the Israeli government to commit war crimes, to violate international law, and to operate with callous disregard for human life. Children are dying, families are crying out for survival, and our shared humanity is in danger. A ceasefire is the mandate, and we must respond accordingly.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. It's that righteous indignation that's keeping us warm out here. Okay, so now I think we'll bring Representative Omar.
Yeah, and then we'll have some final words from rabbis after Representative
Okay,
Omar speaks.
all right.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognize Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This country is riddled with division and inequity that are entrenched in our policies, laws, and institutions. These entrenched disparities leave so many of us out of the conversation, out of opportunity, and out of the room where the fate of our communities are decided. Before my Republican colleagues get triggered by the word equity, I want to remind them that this conversation is about many of the things they claim to support: the power of local voices, the inclusion of rural communities, and the well-being of people in their districts as well as mine. Members of underserved communities, many of whom have endured generations of discrimination and disinvestment, still confront significant barriers to realizing the full promise of America. Black and brown people, indigenous people, LGBTQIA people, disabled people, and others are so often forgotten or intentionally left behind. The federal government has a responsibility and a duty to make every effort to remove these barriers, and they must take a whole of government approach to do so. Administrator Carnahan, I want to ask you a few questions about some of the initiatives GSA is focusing on to advance equity. How does GSA's Good Neighbor program support local community goals, economic recovery, and environmental justice?
Yeah, thanks for that question. But I'm really proud of the Good Neighbor program. It's something that you would expect the federal government to do this all the time, but historically it has not always happened. And so it really is about, I think, intentionality, about figuring out how we can be positive drivers in communities. There's been a long history of federal government taking activity that's divided communities, whether it's in transportation access or highways going through neighborhoods. But we know that the part that we play, which is citing decisions that impact communities, ought to be done talking to communities. They're the ones who know what they need and where they can make urban planning decisions that can transform neighborhoods. So that's what we do. I will say that in one area in particular that we're focused on is in the tribal land. We got a significant amount of money in the bipartisan infrastructure law to invest in border crossings at the northern and southern borders. Some of that goes through tribal lands. And so to make sure that we are dealing with those nation-to-nation relationships in ways that are appropriate, but also get good value for taxpayers.
Thank you so much. And so GSA expanded this program significantly in 2022, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. How else is GSA ensuring its public building footprint is contributing to the prosperity and environmental justice of local communities?
Well, as I mentioned, we're very serious about citing decisions that we make. I mentioned earlier today that in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, for example, your home state, there was a new courthouse that was put up. And it was in collaboration with that community that the area of town was decided on, because it was an area that hadn't been always invested in, and now is going to be an economic anchor in that part of the community. And so that's how we can make a big difference as the federal government. We use our power both in buying things, but also placing assets to help communities grow.
Thank you. GSA is also conducting a first-of-its-kind evaluation to assess the effectiveness of equity efforts across American Rescue Plan programs. Administrator, has this evaluation provided any insight so far, and how will its findings be used to improve other programs?
So I think there was a reference earlier to that evaluation, and I'm just not familiar with it, but I will find out.
Thank you.
And circle back with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. One of the many problems facing so many of these marginalized and underserved communities is the inequities in technology design and delivery. This means that those who most need government services will often have the most difficulty accessing them. GSA has indicated that improving this is a priority to better serve our communities. How is GSA implementing this priority, and how is it making a difference for constituents in districts like mine?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. You know, this is a thing that's really important. Like, government doesn't get to choose its customers, right? It's our job to serve everyone, which means not only do we need to focus on security and privacy and ease of access, but also accessibility, and to ensure we get that right. There's a particular thing that we've done at GSA to create shared services so other government agencies can do this relatively easily because we've helped pave the way. It's a thing called the U.S. Web Design System, which essentially, think about it like if you're going to set up a website for the government, you can go to, think of it like a hardware store that has all the bits and pieces that you would need to create a website, but it ensures that it's accessible for everyone. And so that's the kind of thing that we're trying to focus on when it comes to shared services, and it gives better service to everybody.
Thank you. I can't overemphasize how critical it is that GSA and all federal agencies continue to advance equity in everything they do. Administrator Carnahan, I just wanted to thank you for your testimony. I look forward to seeing your agency's work implemented to elevate underserved communities and bring us closer to equal opportunity that we all deserve. I yield back.